Tacticus is an incredibly deep game with many different modes to master. Today we'll take a look at guild raids, focusing on who to level and how to use them. When you first join a new guild, there are a couple of new modes available to you. One is Guild Wars, where you defend and fight other teams by attacking opponents' bases on a map, but the one we are going to deep dive into today is Guild Raids. This is where you and your guildmates take down huge, immensely powerful lore characters in order to gain guild credits that you can spend in the guild shop and orbs that allow you to level up characters. As of today, there are 8 bosses, and there will be another one joining soon as Magnus the Red and Demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns will be joining on September the 25th. Until then, the ones we have are Avatar of Cain, Gazgul, Hive Tyrant, Mortarion, Rogaldorn, Screamer Killer, Sarek, and Tervagon. And that's a lot of different enemies with a lot of different skills to deal with, and that's without going into depth about all the sub-bosses too. So how do we manage them all? Well, right now there are 3 top meta teams that have been built up by the best guilds in the game, and so today I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one, how it works, and which bosses it works best against. If you're a newer player, however, I want to make it clear that I'm about to talk about really endgame teams. This allows you to understand the meta, and perhaps you want to start your long journey towards building up to them. My advice for newer players in Guild Raid is pretty simple. You want to pick a lot of spawning characters, so this can be Archimatos, Commissar Yarix, Notfloga, or if you want to start your journey towards the teams below, then Bellator, Tangida, Shosil, Aleph Null and Abraxas could be good early options. They are generally powerful characters that you will need in all of your Tacticus career. Whatever you choose, if you want to participate in guild raids at a decent level, you will need Eldryon, and we'll talk more about him as we go. The general idea for new players is that you get Eldryon buffing and everybody else doing as much burst damage as they can with their spawns before everybody dies. The spawns also absorb a lot of the boss attacks, and the only boss that's a bit rubbish for is Rogaldorn, as his forward attack is triggered whenever a spawn stands on it, and this can cause a fair bit of carnage. Hopefully that's all clear. Let's get into it. We'll begin by exploring the teams themselves. As mentioned, we have 3 different teams. I've ordered them in terms of difficulty to use. They are the multi-hit team, the Neurothrope team, and the Admech team. I'll go through the core members of each one, and then we'll talk about some possible substitutes that you can use as well. I'm also going to call out a pivotal team member that brings it all together. So starting with the multi-hit team, it's all about taking characters with a lot of attacks, and then boosting their damage to crazy levels. The pivotal team member is Ragnar. His active skill, Warhowl, and passive skill, Saga of the Warrior Born, as well as his Beast Slayer and Rapid Assault traits, mean that his first attack is absolutely insane. Then you back him up with 3 boosting characters, all leveling up their passive skills as much as possible, ideally to level 50. Eldryon with his passive Doom. This increases damage against a target when Eldryon is stood 2 hexes away. Kalgar with his passive Rites of Battle, which increases friendly damage for anyone stood next to him. And Athana with her passive Path of Command. This slightly increases the damage done to any character within 2 hexes, but more importantly, it increases their crit chance up to a max of 20%. So essentially this is all focused around buffing Ragnar up to insane levels of damage. Even better if Ragnar can charge at the enemy each turn, but we'll get into this later. For the 5th character of the team, there are 2 main ones I would recommend checking out, Bellator and Moggan Ra. Bellator is a fine character to have generally, especially if you haven't opened up Moggan Ra yet, but Moggan Ra is one of the more versatile characters in the game. Each have their benefits against different bosses, and each brings a slightly different flavour to your team. Moving on to the Neurothrope team, and already you can tell that the pivotal team member is Neurothrope. With his passive Neuroparasite, his damage is boosted every time someone does psychic damage or suppresses the enemy. So as you can imagine, the core of the team is Psychers. We start with Abraxas, who really speeds up the addition of the Neuroparasites due to a combination of his active, Malefic Maelstrom, which fills the battlefield with a pink horror and many screamers of Chench. Then his passive allows adjacent Chaos units to do extra psychic damage, which means they all add Neuroparasites when they hit. Generally, whenever we need Abraxas, we also need Yazagor, and this time it's no different. Yazagor does pretty much nothing except using his Sorceress Facade. He will move Abraxas into a different cell, which allows Abraxas to spawn a bunch more psychic damaging screamers. Ahriman is the final piece of the puzzle, as his passive Psychic Stock multiplies all the psychic damage done to a character if the enemy stood on a hex that is on fire. So it's all about getting those neuroparasites maxed out on an enemy, which is 15 in total, doing that as quickly as possible, and then just battering the enemy with massive hits each turn. For the 5th character in the team, there are 2 main recommendations here. It's either Eldrion to further boost the damage while adding neuroparasites with his own psychic attacks, or it's Rosita, whose passive Condemner Strike boosts damage specifically against Psychers, and so comes in handy when fighting against the guild raid bosses who are also Psychers. Finally, for the Admech team, it's all about taking mechanical characters and shooting at stuff a lot. The pivotal team member is Exeter Rowe. Using his optimized gate, he will attack an enemy every time another mechanical character attacks it. And oh boy, you can really stack this up to stupid levels. The main characters backing him up are Eldrion, again for his passive Doom, which just boosts enemies' damage by doing so much. And this will really start to show you why Eldrion is called King of the Guild Raids. Tangida, who adds mechanical spawns that'll shoot from a distance with his passive Control Edict, and then his active makes him do a lot more damage. And Actus, whose passive Galvanic Field allows mechanical characters to attack again, which of course then lets Exeter Rowe attack again. So with each of these characters shooting at an enemy, Exeter Rowe just starts swinging over and over again like some drugged up boxer. For the 5th character of the team, again there are 2 main ones to recommend, Shosil and Aleph Null. Shosil adds more ranged mechanical spawns, while Aleph Null adds more meleeing mechanical spawns. So those are the 3 teams, and if I was going to recommend a team to get started with, then this really depends on which of the characters you already have. None of these teams can be completely picked up through campaigns, for example, although the Neurothrope team comes closest. You are just missing the actual pivotal team member Neurothrope himself. So if you have Neurothrope, then I would probably start there, even though they're not the easiest team to use. If you have been longer in the game, then the multi-hit team is probably a bit more rounded. There is still the opportunity to get Ragnar from his legendary event, and if you don't have Calgar, then maybe you could swap in for another melee champion like Onshi to get double War Howls, but it's definitely going to be less damage overall. The Admech team is currently the most difficult to obtain without a lot of luck in the requisition pools, so that would be the last one I would suggest, but it really does depend on who you've already opened. One thing that I do want to mention is that if you're going to maximize your damage, you might have already guessed that you're going to want to push a pivotal character for each team as high as you possibly can. This means they should eventually be Diamond 3, with their appropriate skills leveled to 50, and their weapons ascended to 11. The other priority is to level Eldrion's Doom to level 50 as early as possible, as he features in all teams and really is king of the guild raids. This of course will take a long time, but once you get into a good place, you'll be able to hit over 10 million damage against epic and legendary bosses in a single guild raid season, which is such an amazing boost to your guild raid's position. Just don't expect to do this in day 1. At that point, you will need 2 teams ready to go as you need different tools for different bosses. So let's dive into how you should battle with each team, and we'll talk about the best bosses they can face along the way. We're going to start with a multi-hit team, and there are 4 bosses that they can do particularly well against. They are Rogaldorn, Gazgul, Hive Tyrant, and Tervagon. They also do okay against Screamer Killer, Zarek, and Avatar. The only one they really struggle against is Mortarion. Even as you set up, you'll want to consider your positioning with this team. You're trying to do a few things here. After the boss moves in his first turn, you want to try and make sure that everybody's positions will be in range on their next turn. This is not always possible in each map, and it takes a collaborative effort from your guild sharing replays to find out the best ways to position each season. Firstly, you should be looking for the high ground. When you attack from higher ground than the boss, then you do more damage. It's simple and should always be one of the first things that you pay attention to. One very important note is that you want to keep Ragnar out of melee range from the boss once he settles. The reason for this is to maximize your score. You want to charge at the boss in Ragnar's first attack using his rapid assault trait, which gives his first attack in a battle an extra 25% damage, and his War Howl gives him up to 36% extra crit chance and another 33% damage, which is capped at a certain amount. When your first round starts, there's an order to how you should be moving as well. You start by moving Eldrion into place. This means they should be 2 hexes from the boss in order to maximize their Doom skill damage boost. Then check how best you can get Calgar and Ragnar into position. Make sure that Ragnar can reach the boss, Calgar's next to him, and Athana can be next to both of them and in melee distance from the boss. The final piece is to move your last character into place. If it's Bellator, he should be in melee combat range. If it's Maugan Ra, ideally you won't need to move and still be in range of Calgar and Athana's buffs, as this will increase his range damage to 25% due to having the heavy weapon trait. Now, after all the positioning, you're ready to attack. So go for it, batter that beast, and if you've started in the right position, you can do a crazy amount of damage. Now let's look at the Neurothrope team. This one's going to be quite fun to play as it works the reverse of Ragnar, where his damage is front loaded to the first hit of the battle, whereas Neurothrope does more and more damage as the battle continues. This team works best against Mortarion and Avatar and doesn't quite hit the heights of the other teams for the other battles. For this replay I'm about to show, we're using a slightly modified team. Let's just pretend that Aleph Null is Yazagor. To start with, we move around the edges a little bit to try and pull Mortarion towards us. We want to end up with some of the characters on the high ground and Morty on the low ground, and this takes a little maneuvering. The first hit we do is Neurothrope's active Spirit Leech. This triggers his Neuroparasite twice and starts the battle off quickly. The goal is to get the boss to have 15 Neuroparasites as quickly as possible. Moving everyone back, we entice Morty into the lower ground, and then the real fun can start. We move Eldrion into his usual 2-hex position away from the boss, and Abraxas 2 hexes from the boss also. If you had Rosita, this would be the time to use her active Brazier of Holy Fire so that you can maximize this round and next round's damage with it. So next we spawn all of Abraxas' little minions, and once that's done, we'll use Yazagor to move Abraxas over to some space, then get Eldrion to hit the boss, and Abraxas will start his spawns again. This adds another bunch of parasites, and you're off and running. From there, you keep maneuvering into good positions, hitting the enemy with everyone, and Neurothrope goes last until you have 15 Neuroparasites on the boss, then you can go in any order. Finish the battle with Eldrion's Executioner active, and you should have put some crazy damage down. Moving into the mechanicals, we'll look at the Admech team next, and this one definitely ramps up the difficulty, especially if you have an underpowered team against the legendary bosses, because it really centers around Exeter Row, who's a bit squishier than Ragnar and needs to get into melee range, whereas Neurothrope can fly around the edges of battle, hitting from afar. In terms of the best bosses for them to fight, I would say it's Zarek and Screamer Killer. They also do well with Mortarion, Hive Tyrant or Tervagon. So the battle starts and you want to move up and then get into position. You want to have Exeter Row in the face of the boss. Eldrion is the second one to get into position and should be in the usual 2 hexes away. Tangida and Actus stand next to each other with Tangida in as much space as possible. Shosil or Aleph Null takes up the remaining space. Remember, you want to get Exeter Row onto high ground as much as possible and next to the boss as a priority. Once everyone's in place and within range of the boss, hit Exeter Row's active, which might take 2 turns to get everyone into place of course, and then start wailing on the boss. As everyone hits the boss, Exeter will take an extra swing. With Actus, you want to be healing Tangida and not attacking. This is because his passive, Galvanic Field, allows a mechanical character to fire again, and when Tangida hits an enemy, he spawns another Skitari, which is also a mechanical, and so every time the Skitari shoots a boss, it's another swing for Exeter Row, and very quickly, things just go insane. The next step is to switch Tangida's stance by triggering his Doctrina Imperatives active. This takes you from the Protector Imperative to the Conqueror Imperative, and that means all friendly adjacent mechanical units do extra damage against champions with reduced armor, which the boss will have if they're stood in a pile of green smoke. At some point, make sure and use Actus's active, Defend the Divine Work, which heals everyone around them and makes them attack again. Then finish off with Eldrion's active skill Executioner, and your score should be quite ridiculous. The last piece of the puzzle is Machines of War. They are noticeably missing from the teams themselves, and that is because they're pretty straightforward and almost team agnostic. It's more about what you're trying to do. For me, I use them as follows. Do I want to block a boss from moving about lots? Yes? Then I'll use Biovore. This works well when you're using the Neurothrope team, for example, and want to block the bosses in one place. Do I want to get a boss moving? If so, then I'll use Forge Fiend to light a fire under his butt, which encourages him to move. This works well, for example, with a multi-hit team in Zarek. You want him to come down from his throne, and that's the best way to make it happen. Or, do you want Exeter Row to hit someone more? Then I'll use Galatian, as he's mechanical. And that's really about the complexities of our current Machines of War. And so with all that information, here's an image for you to grab with the teams and some of their substitutes so that you can easily remember what you're doing. And that's everything for today. There's a lot to chew on here, and I know that for quite a lot of you newer players, it won't be the most useful video so far. However, as you move forwards in your career, I'll continue to do this kind of roundup as the meta changes, so keep an eye on here and good luck on the battlefield.